wrote this on the back of this card, and I'm going to date myself, in 1977, and it's been in my wallet ever since.
Wow.
And the quote says, "Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it." That boldness has genius, magic, and power in it.
Welcome to another edition of the Columbia University Sports Podcast, the CUSP Show. We talk about the business of sports, media, entertainment, leadership, all different kinds of things. We are here in the middle of July, believe it or not, 2025, just before the MLB and WNBA All-Star games and lots of other stuff. I'm Joe Favorito, Tom Richardson. We are somehow on a call together in July. Neither one of us are traveling, so let's have some fun, Tom.
Hi, Joe. Good to see you. So I'll just mention something with our little opening here that I've really been fixated on. This mess that is now college sports. I've been thinking a lot of this since the House settlement, and seeing some of the moves that are being made and reading all the stories about some private equity guys coming in and international expansion and the need for salary caps and the transfer portal. I don't know if it's me because I've never worked in college sports, but it seems like an absolute nightmare.
So I'll give you, I won't say the school, but I was talking to
Could you give the initials?
Or the mascot.
OSU, maybe?
I'll give you a hint. They are mentioned in a Steely Dan song.
Okay. Oh, the Wolverines back in Annandale, Michigan.
No, close.
Okay.
So, is it Steely Dan?
Well, yeah, actually, that wasn't a reference to the Wolverines per se. That was the Wolverine train going up to Bard College in Annandale on the Hudson.
It's a school that is not Auburn.
Okay. Okay, got it.
And the head of their collective said the biggest problem right now is they actually have legitimate deals that they are putting forward for their football players because football players are now back on campus. And he said, we'll put together 75 and they have to submit them into this process to get them approved. And they said, we get approved like 2 a week. And by the way, our guys are back on campus, and these are like legitimate, like car dealers and charities and Pepsi and other places. And they're like, the system has stopped. And it's not like the system has crashed. There's just not enough people on the other end saying, okay.
Right.
And then you loop on top of that, you know, what will happen with the Olympic sports, and nobody knows. And so I'll give you the best one, Tom. So as we mentioned before, I think the Harlem Globetrotters have their 100th anniversary coming up, and I'm helping them with a lot of pieces of it. But one of them is they're going to do an open tryout for the first time in the fall to fill 4 or 5 spots. So Greg Moore, who's been on our podcast before, former commissioner of the SEAC, is helping them put it together. And he sent me a site and said, here are all the players who have gone into the portal just for Division I men's basketball. And there are 1,200 names on there. And we had one of our interns do a search. Out of the 1,200, there are 800 who have no place to play right now.
Oh, my God.
So think about that. You go in and you can't go back.
Right.
So you're just sitting out there. And that's just Division I. So men. And then you have probably God knows how many others, everything from baseball and softball to women's basketball to volleyball, who someone whispered in the ear, oh, just go transfer somewhere. And it hasn't worked out. I think it's going to be, I don't know where it's going to end or if it's going to end. There has to be a head at some point. And, you know, and then you've got the conferences, again, jumping around. The Big East now goes back to ESPN. You know, as you said, Brett Yormark is talking about international expansion, despite the fact that no international students can get visas to come to the United States.
Right. There's that. Right.
So anyway.
Well, Joe, wait, I got to point out that for any astute listeners who know their Steely Dan history, know that you were talking about the Crimson Tide.
Yes, the Crimson
Tide. They call
Tide.
Alabama the Crimson Tide. They call me Deacon Blues. That's the song, Deacon Blues.
Yeah.
So good reference.
Love those guys.
Reference. Yeah. All right, Joe, let's introduce our guest. We got a great guy to talk to.
Yeah, and we're going to talk. He'll go into his history a little bit and how he got here, because he's worked on the brand side, on the tech side, on the innovation side, on the leadership side, and is one of those people who I have always admired, because he's a tremendous listener, and throughout his career he has learned on how to adapt and grow. Does a great podcast now, which he'll talk about in a couple minutes, on leadership, and has been an advisor to the biggest of the big, a whisperer. I will call him a whisperer. And, can't wait to kind of have this discussion, especially about leadership. So Carl Thomas, welcome to the CUSP Show.
Joe, Tom, thanks so much. Awesome to be here. Really looking forward to this session.
Carl, walk us through, for those who, and the ironic thing is, for all the places that you, Tom, and you, Carl, had been, you guys have never really talked until today, which I think is great. But how did you get to where you are today? Walk us through the digital side, all the places that you've been and the people who have influenced you to get to this point.
Right. Well, it starts early. I had the good fortune, and I was blessed to be a scholarship athlete at UCLA. I went there to swim as a swimmer. By design, I was thrown into the water polo pool as a freshman, and they said, you have to learn how to play water polo, and my high school didn't play water polo. So I became, as I say, fortunate and blessed. So I had a dual sport aquatic career in swimming and water polo. Ended up on the U.S. national team in water polo and was a multi-time All-American swimmer there. So that led to my first real job other than tending bar or waiting tables was Speedo swimwear. At the time, Speedo was, and still is, arguably the leading global brand in aquatics apparel and swimwear. It was a little bit serendipity, but also a perfect fit for me at the time. So I spent nearly 7 years at Speedo, exited there as the vice president of marketing. And we were, in the early days, what Nike became. We figured out how to navigate through the amateur rules of the national governing bodies. They weren't that then. And the International Federation. And we reasoned that the coaches were all professionals. So we put a number of the leading swim coaches globally on retainer as the Speedo advisory staff. And then by definition, flowed through the coaches the entire apparel kit for all their swimmers. And that's how it worked. And in Nike, Phil Knight actually took a page out of that book. And obviously, Nike is a far cry from what Speedo would ever be. But that was the beginning. And there's one moment, Joe, in that Speedo exercise for me where, and you'll all remember this because we're all old enough to remember this. The Ironman triathlon competition was written about in the late 70s in a Sports Illustrated article. And it talked about this, gruel-a-thon, because literally it was. It's 2.5 mile swim, 110 miles on a bike, and a full marathon. And I watched that, and then ABC picked it up on Wide World of Sports. But I reasoned at that time as the marketing VP at Speedo that format was really way more aspirational than it was doable. So I took that swim, bike, run format, collapsed it into what I reasoned was a sort of a weekend warrior format, and it evolved into 1,500 meter swim, 40K bike, 10K run. We tagged it as the Olympic standard distance, and because of my background at Speedo and my understanding of international federations and national governing bodies, I took it upon myself with a number of colleagues to start what became the USA Triathlon Federation, still alive today, and start what became first the International Triathlon Union and now the World Triathlon Organization. And the mission was clear and simple from the get-go. Get triathlon on the Olympic program, which was accomplished in 1992. The ITU was blessed by the International Olympic Committee as recognized as the one and only international federation for triathlon globally. And 1 year later, in 1993, triathlon, both men and women, was put on the Olympic program officially for 2000, and it debuted in Sydney.
Amazing. I didn't know. I wouldn't have guessed 33 years. That's impressive. How many years did it actually take to come to fruition? The effort.
We launched the U.S. Triathlon Series in 1982, ran it for 13 years, 150 plus triathlon events, a couple of 100,000 athletes went through the system, but the format took hold worldwide. And we used that format both at the national governing body level as well as the international federation level to get awareness, if you will, throughout the world, with really the primary audience being the IOC membership, because those are the guys and women who would decide if and when.
I thought you were going to say the one thing you had to put out to everybody was don't drown, but that's a different story. So.
Well, I will, with my fingers crossed, tell you that while we did have accidents, particularly on the bike, we never lost a triathlete in all those years and all those events, whether it be, cardiac arrest or an unfortunate mishap in the swim, because every one of these swims was in open water, never in a pool. It was either an ocean or a lake.
I think I feel like the movie's halfway done, and I want to hear this or not how it ends, but how it continues. So I'd love to hear the chronology.
Yeah, especially when you get to hook it and all the technology, which that's Tom's bread and butter. But
Right.
How you evolved all that knowledge into a digital company as well.
Got it. So Speedo. Then I spin out the U.S. Triathlon Series, launch my own company, CAT Sports. That goes through the early 90s. I then get recruited and go to Universal Studios. So I leave sport. I go into the big sandbox of global entertainment, and I ran commercial partnerships there for the theme park group. I spent nearly 6 years there. That's where I met my best boss, which is it was the impetus, Joe, for the podcast, The Best Boss Ever. Left there, and then that boss took the CEO job at tickets.com.
Wow.
And he recruited and hired me as the chief revenue officer, and I also held the chief marketing officer title. That's where I cut my teeth on technology. At the time, tickets.com had the most robust internet ticketing engine of anyone. And I'm talking from Ticketmaster. Access wasn't even a thing yet, but any entity in the primary ticketing space, as internet ticketing became the thing, we were at tickets.com way ahead of the rest of the world. So far ahead.
Wait, weren't you guys, it just hit me, Joe, weren't you guys the main partner of MLB Advanced Media?
We were.
Yeah, okay. That's when I first learned about tickets.com.
We had, and this is, in the Bob Bowman, Noah Garden days, we had an exclusive relationship with Major League Baseball Advanced Media. But that term I'm going to use loosely, because even soaking wet at our high water mark, we only had 20 of the 30 Major League Baseball teams. Because of the owner's clause, the owners essentially can do anything they want, whenever they want, irrespective of anything else that's going on in the world. Okay. But that's a really good story, because Bowman and his BAM team recognized what I just said, which was that tickets.com had the most robust, most effective internet ticketing engine. We also were able to clear transactions much more quickly than anyone else on the planet. So the user experience for ticket buyers was amazingly smooth. And ultimately, Major League Baseball Advanced Media bought the company.
Yeah, that's right. And that was, were you there when that happened?
I was. That was in
Okay.
2005.
Okay.
I was on that leadership team. And then, as we exited tickets.com, I did a stint in private equity, which I loved. I always was fascinated by PE, and we were owned at tickets.com, even though for a New York minute we were publicly traded. General Atlantic Partners was the majority shareholder. So I got sort of a first-hand tutorial in how PE operated, PE meaning private equity, what they looked for, their KPIs, because they're at their core, they're financial engineers / re-engineers. Most PE firms are not operators. Post tickets.com, I spent 3 years as a deal hunter, and an entrepreneur in residence at J.H. Whitney Capital Partners, which was really fun and super educational because I got I'm not going to say a PhD, but I'll call it a master's degree in how private equity worked, what they looked for, and how their operational perspective from a financial point of view was deployed against their portfolio companies.
Nice. And then at some point you, I suppose after that you got into Hook It. Is
Yeah,
that
it
right?
was
Yeah.
several years on. There was one
Okay.
moment in between there where I CEO'd a technology-based consumer products company called H2O Audio, underwater headsets and headphones. Um, that actually is what led to Hook It. I became aware of Scott Tilton. He actually pitched me on the predecessor company to Hook It, same company, different name. It was called Looped, pre the name change to Hook It, because he was looking for venture capital money, private equity money. Pitched me when I was running deals for J.H. Whitney Capital Partners. Really liked Scott and his partner, R.J. Krause. And in late 2015, as I exited the consumer products company, Scott was coming through a program that I've been a mentor here in San Diego for a number of years called San Diego Sport Innovators. So he brought Hook It into the classroom, if you will. I became one of the mentors as we moved Hook It through the rigors of the, 5-point process that we did. And then I pulled Scott aside. I said, listen, essentially what you have is a methodology where Nielsen meets Facebook. We all know, Joe, you know this, Nielsen's rating system historically has been somewhere between voodoo and made up. Uh, and the
Oh, I love
reality
that.
is,
Yeah.
even though it is that, it's the marketplace, right?
Yeah.
They make the market
And
between
everybody agreed
sellers.
on that standard for good or for bad.
That's right. So what Hook It brought to the fore was a methodology to amplify and augment what Nielsen might be doing for rights holders, for athletes, for brands, and measure the social media impact of every one of the platforms, posts, and then the follow-on engagement of every one of those posts, from likes to shares to comments to reposts to views, and built a method whereby we could quantify what the value of those posts were on a per post basis. And then it rolled up via dashboard over a month, a quarter, a year, and it really became a tool for brands and rights holders to at least have some understanding of what the value of social media was, in addition to whatever traditional media value was being brought to the fore.
Yeah, and that's super interesting because that was unprecedented at the time.
It
It was
was.
extremely progressive. And I think everybody accepted the fact when social really broke, especially after the launch of Instagram, which I think was 10 or 11, the amount of data available through their analytics backends was incredible. And then as more commercial messaging started to come in, more sponsorship support, I think many of us were thinking the same thing. Like, how do you measure this? Because you're relying on the platforms to give you what I'd call kind of basic data and analytics reports. But clearly there was a value being created that was building kind of almost by the year in a pretty significant way, because those platforms just kept scaling to heights that none of us could have imagined in the early part of social media. So that probably was a well-positioned company with a good pitch, I imagine.
It was both. It
Yeah.
was well positioned with a good pitch and some underlying tech that was not only useful but groundbreaking. The one thing I'll say is, we've all heard from a tech perspective the term deep machine learning. That's now evolved into artificial intelligence and generative AI and all those kind of things. But the reality is that you can train the machine to do things that otherwise couldn't be done. So the visual learning part of the deep machine algorithms that brought Hookit to the fore, we could not only look at the text in a post, but we could look at the visual in an Instagram post, find the Coca-Cola logo, where it was positioned, how much real estate it took up on the post, the clarity of the brand or logo, and assign a value to that.
Right.
And that was kind of a groundbreaker right
Yeah,
there.
for sure.
Because very few others could do it. Now it's de rigueur, right? I mean, facial visual recognition, brand recognition from a photographic perspective is you can't operate in our world without that. But that was one of the things that Hookit did really well.
Yeah. So you take all those things, we'll touch, you can touch on the podcast and the leadership thing, but I want to talk about leadership because you've had anyone who's in our program, Tom, or been in our program, Carl touches on so many areas that everyone say, oh, I want to work in private equity. Oh, I want to work in finance. Oh, I want to work in technology. I want to work in on the brand side. I want to work in the Olympic space. All those things you have rolled up in all the experience that you've had. Talk about the core values of leadership today versus what they were when you were at those other companies. Has it changed? And if it's changed, how has it been nuanced to define kind of what success is today?
Yeah. Well, it has certainly changed, but the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? So there are essentially, in my view, now probably a third path, call it the tech path, but historically there have been sort of two paths to the C-suite. Marketing, sales, biz dev on the one hand, finance on the other, right? And you can go across public companies today and look at the CEOs and figure out very quickly how they got to where they are in one of those two pathways. And then I would submit that the big change over the last 10 years has been the rapid evolution and expansion of technology. So tech savvy CEOs are more and more the case as opposed to 10, 12, 15 years ago where that was an afterthought. So I would say in that regard, biggest change, the evolution and rapidly changing and evolving world of tech. But still, sales, biz dev, marketing, all required to grow on the one hand, and then the financial rigor and discipline on the other will also support leaders. The reality here is a leadership style as an individual and the culture that that style foments always starts at the top. And the larger the company, the harder it is to change that culture. Mm-hmm. And you only have to look as far as the last, call it 10 years at Disney, right? So Iger, Bob Iger, is the anointed one, does amazing things at Disney over his leadership career there. But they were fundamentally challenged in one very significant way. They struggled with succession planning. I mean, really struggled with succession planning, even though the board and Bob's leadership was amazing. You sort of scratch your head as to why that was the case. Bob decides to leave. They bring in the next CEO, and it's an abysmal disaster. So bad that they have to go bring Iger back to turn the ship back around. And he's still there. And by the way, I don't know that their succession planning has gotten any better, right? Nope. Right.
It's taken up a lot of ink over the last year, that's for sure.
Yeah, and they will continue to because they're such a pivotal, if you will, iconic and benchmark company, particularly in sport, media, and entertainment, which is sort of the three pillars of my whole career. You just can't get very far without talking about Disney.
Yeah, and I know that you have. I was looking at all the stuff you promote on your website, and you have one speaking topic called "Old School Meets New School." So I'd love you to talk about that, especially as it relates to this particular issue, because, and maybe this is the case at Disney, you have a business that is grounded primarily in legacy media. Obviously, they've made great strides in new media and digital and stuff like that. But this seems to be the big tension in companies like Paramount, like NBC Universal, Disney, Warner Brothers, Discovery, et cetera. Like this is the tension. Like how do you do old school stuff and deal with new school stuff on everything from your actual product lines to your own corporate philosophy, the people you hire, et cetera?
Yeah. Man, if we could collectively answer that question, we could all retire
Right,
next week.
right. It's a whole new consulting opportunity here.
Exactly. So I'll say it again. I think my opinion, and what I've observed over the course of my career is it starts at the top, and it starts with a choice. One, as the CEO slash leader, call him or her whatever you choose to, has to make a choice that if legacy media got us to where we are, we have to have, a 360-degree view of where it's going, not where it's going in 3, 6, 9, or 12 months, but where it's going in the next 3 to 7 years. Everybody talks about the 5-year plan. In the world of tech, you're lucky if you can get 18 months in front of where things are going, let alone 5 years. That's never going to happen. But unless or until a vision of that future is articulated, you sort of start with the end in mind and then work backwards. So if 5 years from now we want to be Z and we're at L today, I'm using an alphabetical analogy here. What do we need to do between today and Z to get through the remaining parts of the alphabet? And that is a huge combination of art, science, an act of will. And when one, as a leader, does that, by definition, the culture must change. And there are going to be legacy executives and strongholds and pods in that company that are going to be hugely resistant. And that's where the tension is.
Yeah.
So you got to be, on the one hand, be willing to admit that where you are is not where you want to be. And on the other hand, as the leader or the C-suite, be able to articulate a vision that ultimately needs to be sold and implemented across the organization. And that I'm going to call inertia or lack thereof. And the stronger the leadership position is in articulating that future vision, the quicker the company will pivot if a pivot is necessary. In some instances, a full-on pivot might be the result of a lot of baby steps, right? You don't rip the Band-Aid off, so to speak. You sort of say, okay, this patient is sick. We're going to heal this patient, and here's how we're going to do it.
Got it. So it's 2 questions off of that. And actually, they're not questions, 2 observations, but I'd love your opinion on who's doing it right. You worked at PE. PE walks into all the stuff Tom mentioned at the beginning of college, with now college and the equity money that's going into colleges. And they sit there and say, that's all great, but we need our money back in 18 months.
Right.
So how do you factor that in if you're making the investment from the PE side? The other thing is international, because now you're seeing, whether it's Middle Eastern money, Chinese money coming from other places flowing into this business that doesn't understand the culture. So if you're at the top of the business, how do you weigh those things? And more importantly, as you look at all those things, can you give us a couple of examples of companies that you're following that you think are doing it right and going to succeed that people may not?
Yeah, and I want to actually propose an example to get into after you answer.
And Tom, you can answer that too, obviously.
Well, I just read a really interesting deep dive on the challenge that Apple is facing. $3 trillion company that everyone would agree is either the most successful company in history or certainly one of them. Tim Cook is 65, and as many people know, he was an ops guy supply chain all the way. That was his expertise, a real contrast to Jobs, the big visionary and product guy. And it was announced just a few days ago that the number two guy at Apple, Jeff Williams, is stepping down, which many people saw as a huge issue because they've got big challenges. So you have like the strategy challenges of where we're going in the 3 to 7 years, Carl, but they're also facing day-to-day challenges now with tariffs, all the issues with the supply chain disruption that's been caused. So you think about that one in particular, and it hadn't occurred to me because as Joe knows, I'm a bit of an Apple fanboy. But at the end of that article, I'm like, oh my God, they got some big decisions to make about leadership. And I don't think they named anybody yet, but there's someone specific in mind that may replace Williams, but he's another supply chain guy. So some would say, I don't know, it's awfully complicated right now in this world and product development and changing tastes of consumers. Do we really want to go with the supply chain guy again? Anyway, I want to throw that in there for consideration.
So that's a really good example. One, Apple's publicly traded and has, I don't know, they have $1 trillion market cap yet? They might.
It's three.
Three.
Trillion.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I rather would guess that they're the first one to hit that number.
They're actually not even the highest right now. NVIDIA, the GPU company on the hardware, is actually, they broke 4 trillion.
Right. So I would posit that supply chain ops guys at Apple were an absolute necessity because it was the hardware supply chain, if you will, as the Trojan horse, that carried the software. And the software is really, in my humble opinion, the future of a company like Apple. So when I talked about, ops, finance, all that, I talked about sales, marketing, biz dev. This is where that tech path comes in and has, in the case of Apple, perhaps the fastest lane on that 3-lane highway. Right. Because the device is right. What good, bad, or indifferent we've all become hooked on, to use a hook it comment. That said, we're hooked on it because of what it does for us and the answers it provides if we're looking for answers, or the communication threads that come out of it. In the grand scheme of things, as artificial intelligence continues to go down its track at a ridiculous rate of speed, the software, if you will, is really where the future is. In device world, the devices are still going to be required until they start putting chips in our brains, right? So you got to lever off the device. Back to Joe's private equity question, depending on the firm, and there are more private equity firms today that are out there deploying capital than ever, and they have different, sort of investment theses, plural. In some areas, the turnaround time is 3 to 7 years. And if you take an investment from a company that has told you it's a 3 to 7 year window, sooner the better, that's on you. If you take that money, you got to figure out that you're going to be held to account. There's also a growing niche in private equity called, quote unquote, patient money. And that patient money can look at a 7 to 10 year horizon, which is no less rigorous from the entrepreneur's perspective, but it gives a little more runway to bring a vision into fruition. And the third one is what I'll call hybrid. And historically, you had venture capital on the one hand, which was the early stage investment vehicle after seed and after friends and family. Then you went to a venture capital company, and their job was to get you to a place where either more money could come in, or you could take the company public, or you could sell it to a strategic in the marketplace, in your market segment. Private equity was the late stage money that came in after one company was established and uses those methods I talked about earlier. But there's a hybrid model now where an emerging segment in the investment community plays sort of both sides of that desk. On the one hand, forward-looking, forward-thinking PE firms will take early risk. Sixth Street Capital, as an example, out of San Francisco, buys the women's NWSL club, and it's never even been on the field. So that's
Now,
a
that's not a typical
literal
deal, obviously.
startup from ground
Right.
zero. And in the same breath, via Legends, they buy ASM Global for $2.3 billion, right? So you have these bookends on a single company, and that sort of speaks to that hybrid nature I'm talking about. Listen, when one or an entrepreneur takes third-party money like that, that changes the game radically because the level of accountability, the frequency of accountability, is very rigorous, and that's why a lot of times when money comes in, the founder slash entrepreneur is out in 2 or 3 years. This is not what I want to do. I don't want to run a company for a private equity firm. I liked doing what got me here.
Right. So, Carl, how does that square with private equity going into athletics in universities? Because what is the exit ramp look like? Is it a secondary market where another PE will say, "Well, you've appreciated 90% in the last 5 years, and I'm going to buy that now because I think it's going to appreciate another 90% in the next 5 years."
Yeah.
It's not like Ohio State's going to be sold,
Right.
you know.
Here's the funny part. Can either of you name one college who's ever given money back to somebody? It's never happened. So anyway,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Maybe a security deposit from something in your dorm room.
Right.
So that's a really good question, and as I said earlier,
That's what I've been wondering about the last couple of months as this private equity story keeps building. It's like, what
so
is the
I've
other
thought
side
a
of
lot
this?
about this because there are models in other industries and in sport that would inform or could inform this. So the reality is the Ohio State University is not going to sell equity to anybody, nor is their athletic department. However, what could happen is they collectively, whether it's the Big Ten, whether it's the SEC, they could take their basket of rights, their television media rights, their sponsorship rights, their NIL rights, and they could extract those from the traditional athletic department construct, put them in a separate company. Joe, this goes back to the early days of the NFL and the creation of NFL properties. Okay? Now you have an entity that is arm's length from the university, arm's length from the NCAA, arm's length from the conference, but the basket of rights that entity holds is where the money is. That model could work for third-party investment.
And where does it go ultimately? A buyer, again, stepping in to place another bet on the appreciation of that asset, of that basket of rights?
Yeah, that goes back to our early days in the stock market of the pump and dump, right? So the conventional wisdom back then is great. You bought the stock. Now who are you going to sell it to?
Right.
It's the greater fool theory. Who comes in after and helps deliver the returns that any PE firm worth their salt must at least model or anticipate the chances of it occurring are pretty solid. I don't know the answer to that question,
Yeah,
Tom.
I think it's
I
just really interesting
I
because
was
right now it's
simply
such
trying to, and I've been thinking about this a lot, how all this sorts itself out because and then you've got the underlying rights holders. Is ESPN going to allow the Big Ten to put their media rights in another entity, right? That can be bought and sold and arbitraged in the
yeah.
marketplace. Don't know the answer to those questions, but you know, smarter guys than me are trying to figure that out, and they
No,
haven't yet.
it's amazing. It's a real brain teaser. I want to go back to this question of old and new and the challenges of modern leadership. There's been so much written about the challenge of managing Gen Z. I think we just hit a mark where the majority of the workforce is like under 35 or something like that in America. So Gen Z ending roughly around age 30, early 30s. Different mindset about what's important in a job, about rewards, training and development, etc. Well, all the psychology associated with that.
Right.
It seems like that's would be one of the biggest challenges if you're running, whether the company is 100 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people. Like you have to basically build a scaffold that would allow you to handle the managerial challenges of a workforce ranging in age from early 20s to 70s or 60s or something
Yeah, right.
like that, with very different expectations about everything from remote work versus in person to perks to the expected amount of time off, paternity leave, which the older employees probably didn't get. Now it's sometimes as many as 3 months, et cetera. That to me seems like a huge challenge right now in modern business. It's almost like you need two tracks of leadership study to deal with that. What do you think?
Well, yeah. I mean, this is really a conundrum of, I would say a significant order of magnitude. On the one hand, we talked about technology and how rapidly technology has grown over the last 10, 12, 15 years. What tech has taught these youngsters is they can come out of college or come out with a master's degree, or in some cases, not even go to
Right.
college. They taught themselves how to program in their, garage, and immediately walk into a six-figure annual job with the expectation that they might last 2 or 3 years because there's a replacement part that's coming that tech companies may or may not worry about, right? So when you're talking about, go back to Bob Iger in his mid 70s and managing, that behemoth of an organization, the the creative aspect of what that is, whether it's, coming up with the next concept for a Pixar movie, or in the case of tech, it's writing the next great algorithm from a programming perspective that's going to do faster, smarter, better, bigger, deeper things, however we want to define things. That's huge. So the layers of management in a multi-thousand person employee-based company like Disney compared with when I was at Hookit, we had 30 people. And we had a bunch of those youngsters, but because it was small and tight and every person in the leadership role was accessible and available, that's what I call management by walking around. And that's the benefit of a physical workplace where everybody's together in the same place, where there's that interaction. We used to call it the cooler conversation, or poking your head into an office. The value of that is immense. And I would submit that in the wake of COVID, in that 2 year window where remote work became, on the one hand, a requirement, on the other hand, companies post the COVID lockdown felt like they couldn't get the talent they needed if they required in office. You are seeing a material shift today of employees being required to come back into the office because the productivity loss in 2021 and half of 2022, I don't think anybody could put a number on. It's just too enormous.
Yep.
And I think, as cool as a Zoom call like this is, we get to see each other, we get to hear each other, we get to watch facial expressions. How much more fun would this have been if we were sitting around a four-person table just doing it
Right.
in person?
Agreed. Yeah.
And obviously you now see companies going back to that. And, as Tom and I have talked about numerous times, just the value of randomly showing up and hearing about something is foreign to some people, but it shouldn't be. And hopefully that's going to continue to come back. Last question for me before we get to our three that we had told you about. The New York Post is now doing this thing called Mount Postmore, Tom. I don't know if you've seen that.
I have seen that. I'm not sure I understand what.
It's an easy click thing, like, oh, let's pick a sport and throw.
Well, like everything in a lot of news publications, and
Right.
it's more clickbaity than anything now.
If you took, Carl, it doesn't have to be four, a couple of people who you really have your eye on as these companies are growing, and you say, this is what leadership looks like today, and you're following them, who would they be?
Yeah, that's, I just, they would be, I don't know that I can put a name to it, Joe, but they would be leaders that, to your point in the open, had a great capacity to listen and ask questions of their employee base. That does two things. One, it makes the leadership, and I'll just use that term, accessible and to a degree vulnerable. And if the proletariat, so to speak, the group that does the work, not that leaders don't work because they work overtime, what comes out of that is a level of what I'll call the two T's, truth and trust. So if they believe that they're being told the truth and being legitimately asked questions that they can have an impact on with answers, that engenders a trust level that, in my opinion, is 100% required for optimizing an organization, regardless of the size. Truth and trust, those two things are huge. Cool. And by the way, that's one of the things the physical workplace engenders, because you're going to walk into the CEO in the lunchroom. Let's just say that, right? And good for you if you introduce yourself. Better for him or her if they look at you and say, hey, I'm Joe Favorito. I've been wanting to meet you. Thanks for this opportunity. Tell me where you see upside. Tell me where you see things that you'd like to change. Tell me where you see things that aren't working so well for you. That 5-minute conversation, you just turned that employee into an evangelist.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. Solicit more advice and feedback from all the employees, not just the direct reports.
That's right. And do it in a way that if you as the leader hear a really good idea, you implement it. And you give credit to the individual or pod in your organization that surfaced that idea. How far does that go?
Yeah.
Cool.
My last question is about podcasting. So you've been doing your pod for what? Did you say 4 years?
Just wrapped season 4, but started it literally 5 years ago.
Okay. So you've done presumably then dozens or hundreds of episodes.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just crossed the 90 episode mark.
Nice. Okay. So you now have enough data, to answer the question.
Right.
Joe and I talk about this a lot because we've been doing this a long time, as you may know, like over 9 years.
Right.
What do you think makes a good podcast as a host?
Well, two things.
And then also, I'm sorry, there was two parts, as a host and as a listener, because I assume you listen to other
Well, yeah,
podcasts.
no, there's three parts. There's the
Okay.
host, the guest, and the listeners.
Okay,
Okay.
fine. Fair enough. Yeah.
So first you got to have a guest that one wants to do it. And I've never had a guest that didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
I wanted to do this and I jumped at the chance at the invitation. So thank you guys for that. Secondly, and I'm sure this is the case with y'all. I have learned so much over the last 5 years, not just in terms of information and nuggets and principles that have come from a diverse guest list, but also I've learned how to provocatively and in an authentic, relevant way, I think, you guys will tell me, extract the information out of the guest that I believe our listeners actually want and will resonate with. Because, telling a story is part of it, and telling a really good story is better than telling a bad story. The punchline might be the same, but how you get to the punchline, that's, I think, the art of the interview. And I'm self-taught there to a large degree, but I've listened to lots of different podcasts in lots of different genres. Interestingly enough, as a podcast host, I don't have a podcast per se that is a go-to for me. I sort of surf, and it's fun on the one hand. On the other, you just learn as you go. Like, I'm never going to be a 3-hour live guy like Rogan is, right? That's never going to happen. That said, he's got such an affable way of conversing with his guests that they say stuff that they might not have wanted to say or had planned to say, but he has a way of extracting that information in a very non-threatening way, my opinion. And I'd like to be able to be that guy, and bring conversation to a level that actually is meaningful and relevant and has takeaways that any listener, be they in their 20 somethings or in their 50 somethings, on their way to what they hope would be a CEO role.
Cool.
Yeah, let me just make one comment on that, because it's interesting. Joe and I have been saying this a lot for a long time about what you get in public that is different from podcasts, and that is speakers at conferences, which Joe and I go to a lot of, where they'll do a 30-minute panel and they'll have 4 speakers. And you literally get a couple of minutes, and it's just usually not very satisfying for listeners.
Right.
Or you'll have someone do their own post, but it's clearly with a business interest in mind. And one of the things that always inspired me was that very idea that you referenced with Rogan. And I think like the OG of this was Howard Stern when he did interviews in the radios, and then Tim Ferriss in the business world. I'm a big Tim Ferriss fan.
Yeah.
He would, there was literally no sense of time and limits and rushing. He would let a conversation unfold, and when it happens that way, stuff comes out over time. Like, it may not all. Hey, I have 5 questions. We got 30 minutes.
Yeah, right.
And I need. Hey, Carl, you're really smart, but I need each question. I need each answer to be 1 or 2 minutes. That's not what people want to listen to. It's more like, does this sound like a real conversation where it's a good exchange and there's enough space and air for things to be revealed? And I think that's one reason why those guys are particularly popular, because I'm sure you know this, you'll look at the run time of some of their podcasts, 2 hours and 30 minutes, 1 hour, 55 minutes. I mean, it's never 30 or 40 minutes.
Right.
Now, if you're a good user of the skip button like I am, if there's a specific part of the conversation you want to hear, then my finger's ready to go to miss those 2 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, right.
But I, to me, that's an important difference, especially in a world where our interviews are fast, videos on social media are fast. there's no space for people to reveal themselves, and that's why I think podcasting is so popular.
I for sure agree with that. And, you know, listen, the barrier to entry is about $500.
Barely.
500 bucks and you can be a podcast host, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so it's one of those things that anybody can do, and a lot of anybody's start it and try it and go away from it. Uh, the the thing for me is it's a labor of love,
Mm-hmm.
and what I am able to do because I know who the best boss I ever had was, and I know why, and I know what I learned from him. And I did 3 tours of duty with the guy. So there was a level of that truth and trust that I talked about earlier that really resonated with both of us. All that said, um, the stories about what, like Steve Koonin, great example, right? CEO of the Atlanta Hawks. He and I got to know each other when he was at Coca-Cola, and I was selling sponsorship for Universal Studios, and we formed a great relationship. You listen to that podcast and you hear things that are surprising. Like, he says to me, you want to hear my biggest idea? I said, sure. He said, at the millennium, I wondered to myself, could I put the Coca-Cola logo on the moon? Literally is what he said.
Yeah.
Really?
And I said, okay, you got my attention.
Yeah,
Let's hear that
exactly.
story.
Right.
And he talks about going into Doug Ivester, and Ivester's like, are you kidding me? How do you do it? So he gave him a little money and he explored it. Turns out it would have required a laser so powerful to do it. It was A, questionable whether that laser even existed. But B, if it did exist and you shot that laser to the moon and put the Coke logo on it, any aircraft that crossed that laser's path would be cut in half. So it was, I mean, you hear that story and you
Yeah.
get, that. And so, Joe, you've known Steve for as many years as I have. The guy is unique
Yeah.
and he's a treasure. But
And well
those are the
respected.
kinds of things that come out of these conversations.
Yeah. Cool.
Yep. Very cool. That's a good one. That we haven't heard about the laser on the moon story
Yeah.
before. That's great.
Yeah.
So before I let you go, real quickly, you touched on not listening to podcasts that much, but where you have so many different interests. What do you listen to? What do you read regularly? That's number one. Number two is advice. Always important, especially you're around a lot of young people, mentor a lot of young people, job changers. What's the advice you like to give people? And then the third thing, which is the one we love, is like, what's on your mantle? Is it
Right.
something that's an actual item? Is it something that only exists in your head that you go back to? So those are our last three before we let you go.
Well, those are all great ones. So I read a lot. The 2 books that I have on the mantle, quote unquote, bookshelf behind me. One is called Smart Brevity.
Hmm.
Smart Brevity. And that was written by the Axios founder guys. And if you read an Axios feed, which I do, they immediately tell you how many words and how long that segment will take you to read. That's the first thing you see, which I love. Okay, it's 429 words and it's going to take me 4 minutes. So yeah, if it's 5,000 words and it's going to take me a half hour, not so much. And they've figured out how to take, you know, big stories, fun stories, serendipitous stories, and turn them into overused term, but you'll get it, snackable or bite-sized consumption. So smart brevity I really like because I try to keep that in mind when I communicate. I just came out of an environment where one of my colleagues was notorious for writing 14 paragraph emails. And when you saw his name come in, you immediately knew that you weren't going to read it right away, if at all. Rather, you just pick up the
steel
phone and
yourself
call
to actually
what
read
the
it.
heck. So smart brevity. The other one I have up there was written by 2 ladies, Bay Area based, called Humor Seriously. And they did a really good job of building a case, which I completely subscribe to the value of humor in the workplace. And it's so true. And that was one of the things that, my best boss had. He had a wicked sense of humor. But that should never be lost because one can take oneself very seriously. And it's just not worth it, right? You got to be able to walk down the hall and crack wise or whatever. Or did you see, those kinds of things. So those are two books I would recommend to anybody listening. As far as advice, two things. One, for job seekers, early job seekers, volunteering and interning is huge. It's absolutely huge. And importantly, every individual sort of has to look at themselves in the mirror and say, not only what do I think I really want to do, but what do I know I don't want to do? What don't I want to be? What path do I not want to go down? And many times that's as important, if not more so, than the what I want to do. So when Joe, you talked about it. When you talk about the world of sport, it is so broad and diverse. Brand, product, rights holder, team, agency, the Olympic movement, national government. I mean, it's all over the place. So when somebody tells me they want to be in sports marketing, I say, well, that's like, you want to be on planet Earth. You got to sort of distill that down and tell me exactly what your idea of sport marketing is. So, as far as career change goes, one thing begets the next, right? So you talked about a touchstone. I'm going to show you this. You probably won't be able to read it. So this is the Johann Goethe quote that this, by the way, was my very first business card at Speedo Swimwear.
Wow.
I wrote this on the back of this card, and I'm going to date myself, in 1977, and it's been in my wallet ever since.
Wow.
And the quote says, whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. That boldness has genius, magic, and power in it. So when you put all those things together and you take a step, you just have to sort of innately know that the follow-on steps are going to come. And that tethers back to another big plank in my business career, and that I would call vision. If you want to do something, when we talked about, the 18-month to 5-year to 7-year plan, what does it look like? Can you see it? Bring that vision into clarity, and then the steps to get from where you are to where that vision manifests will unfold kind of in their own organic way.
Got it.
Excellent.
Cool. So before we let you go, where can people find the podcast, and where can they connect with you?
Super easy. YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. The Best Boss Ever, those 4 words. Podcast exists on all 3 of those platforms and a whole bunch of others, but those are the 3 main ones, as you guys know. The website, thebestbossever.com. There's an outreach there, a page where it's very easy to communicate with me. And then, the simple thing is it's Carl at thebestbossever.com. It's pretty intuitive.
You didn't tell us, who was your best boss ever? You said you worked for him 3 times. You never mentioned his name.
Name is Ron Benzian. He was, when he first recruited and hired me, he was the chairman of the Universal Studios theme park division. He left there and then became the CEO of tickets.com. And he recruited and hired me a second time. And as we exited tickets.com, we were both doing the private equity thing. And he reached out to me, and because we, the group I was working with, was an early investor in the House of Blues. And we were looking at the extended House of Blues platform, because House of Blues had purchased this 7 or 8 performing venues that came out of the Universal Studios group after we all left Universal, and he was trying to buy it too. And so with his private equity firm, so we traded a lot of stories, and we got to a point where it was obvious. All of us knew Live Nation buys House of Blues, right? Because they're the strategic buyer. And it was just as Rapino was formulating a public offering. And Ron then became the head of the club, theater, and amphitheater business for Live Nation. Ran that business for 10 years, grew it from about $175 million to just close to $1 billion. And during COVID, there was a strategic change there. Ron left House of Blues, and this is a little story, Joe, so forgive me. He reaches out, I reach out to him, it's like Christmas time of 2020. And we talk, because it's obvious he's left House of Blues, or Live Nation. And he says, hey, I need your help. I go, what? What do you need my help for? You're like Mr. Everything. He goes, no, you know a lot of people in the executive recruiter space. I'm not finished yet. I said, okay. So I reached out to 6 folks I knew in the space, one of whom had the assignment for the next CEO at ASM Global. And I said to Nada Usina, who was running that search, Russell Reynolds at the time. I said, Nada, if this job is what you say it is, I've got the perfect guy for you. And she said, great, introduce me. 75 days later, he's announced as the CEO at ASM Global. Wow. And 6 weeks after that, I signed on as a consultant for Ron. I did a deep dive into a couple of the verticals that ASM managed. And then Jason Oberlander came in as the chief commercial officer, and I just migrated from consultant to full-time employee. And so and then that all culminated with last fall's transaction with Sixth Street and Legends.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Amazing.
Great way to end it.
Yeah.
So, Tom, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah. Well, Carl Thomas, a man of many talents and many cool activities. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Really enjoyed that conversation. And I urge everybody to check out the podcast, The Best Boss Ever, right. Different platforms. Reach out to Carl. It was nice of you to offer your email. And I thought your advice, by the way, was really smart. Just kind of get into the mix and worry about step number 2 later on. Just start with step number 1.
Somehow step number 2 always comes to the fore. Guys, I can't thank you enough. You've been more than generous with your time, and I really appreciated the opportunity to share some, at least personal insights with you based on
that was great.
I'll hesitate to say storied, but a very diverse career that's not over yet.
Yeah, I think we could say storied. It's a storied career. But anyway, Joe, that was great. And Carr, thanks being behind the scene producing as always. We appreciate everybody listening. If anybody's got any suggestions about guests or topics, please reach out. We really appreciate the support. We wish everybody well. Enjoy the summer, and we'll see you on the next episode.